Using conventional rocket technology, it's estimated that it would take nearly 165,000 years for a spacecraft to reach Alpha Centauri, the closest planetary system to Earth's solar system. New research into ion propulsion systems holds the tantalizing possibility of closing that gap. But in the 1950s, an entirely different rocket system promised to complete the same trip in only 44 years. In a program codenamed Project Orion, it was proposed that spaceships could be sent into the outer reaches of space, carrying entire cities using the power of nuclear explosions. At the core of Project Orion was the idea to place atomic bombs at the tail of a spaceship to blast it into space for interplanetary and interstellar travel. Of the project, physicist Freeman Dyson, who worked on the program extensively, wrote for Quanta Magazine, quote, "So we would launch the ship into space, bomb, 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 going up about 4 bombs per second. The idea was first suggested by Soviet rocket pioneer and explosives expert Nikolai Kibalchich in 1881. However, the first serious proposal for nuclear propulsion did not come until a 1947 memorandum published by Stanislaw Ulam, a Polish physicist invited by the United States to work on the Manhattan Project, using calculations made by his coworker F. Reines. With initial feasibility proven in theory, the project was then brought to life in 1958 at General Atomics in San Diego, with American theoretical physicist Ted Taylor and British physicist Freeman Dyson at the helm. Project Orion aimed to create spaceships with simultaneous high thrust and propellant efficiency. The required power to accomplish such a feat would come from external nuclear reactions, which the ship would theoretically survive by using them for impulse against a shielded pusher plate, without having to contain them inside the vehicle engine. This was unlike traditional rockets, such as the ones used in the Apollo program, which produced high thrust at a cost of low propellant efficiency. Conventional rocket engines could push a vehicle to orbit at 3 kilometers per second, while a nuclear blast could push a launch at thousands of kilometers per second in a single stage. Project Orion promised to change the idea of space travel. Dyson wrote for Physics Today, quote, "Our plan was to send ships to Mars and Venus by 1968. At first, considerations were made for using incredibly large nuclear explosions, but the project leaders increasingly leaned towards using multiple smaller 1 megaton deuterium fusion devices. On paper, the proposal seemed highly efficient and relatively cost-effective when considering that deuterium had an approximate cost of $200 per kilogram at the time. In early 1959, Dyson and Taylor realized that the smallest vehicle they could make would be intrinsically tied to the smallest possible bomb yield. The smaller the bomb, the smaller each impulse would be, requiring a higher rate of explosions needed to get to orbit. Additionally, smaller impulses meant less shock on the planned pusher plate, promising smoother acceleration. They settled on a 4,000-ton model ship as a base design. It was determined that the optimal yield for blasts powering an Orion ship, weighing 4,000 tons, would be around 0.15 kilotons, which meant 800 bombs would be required to orbit the Earth. 1 bomb would detonate every second. The spaceship was designed to carry 8 astronauts and 100 tons of cargo. The details about these small nuclear bombs were kept a secret at the time, and many reports on the design had these details blacked out or removed before release. Not all planned Project Orion ships were small, however. The largest designed spaceship was the Super Orion, with a diameter of 400 meters and weighing 8 million tons. It was designed as an interstellar ark and could host a city of 100,000 people or more. The craft was supposedly feasible using materials and engineering systems attainable in 1958, or expected to be attainable soon thereafter, such as boron salts and polyethylene, which could absorb neutrons to minimize nuclear fallout. Dyson even proposed in one of the Super Orion designs that the pusher plate could be made of uranium and later cannibalized for fuel use upon reaching a star. Two major designs defined what could be done, accounting for the upper and lower limits of nuclear-powered spaceships. For the lower limits, an energy-limited pusher plate was designed, which could absorb all the energy of each explosion without being destroyed. It would have a 1mm copper surface with a weight of 5 million tons and a diameter of 20 kilometers. Such a plate would need 100 seconds between explosions so it could radiatively cool. This design would take 1,000 years to reach Alpha Centauri. On the other hand, an alternative momentum-limited pusher plate was considered, in which an ablation coating at the surface is blasted away to eliminate excess heat. Its limitations would be set by the shock absorbers transferring momentum from the impulse-accelerated pusher plate to the smooth-accelerated ship. Further studies indicated that such a fission Orion ship could achieve 9 to 11% at the speed of light. Such a ship could reach Alpha Centauri in about 44 years. In his Cosmos series, famous astronomer Carl Sagan suggested that nuclear stockpiles could be positively used to pursue this endeavor. A preliminary design of the nuclear pulse unit was built as a can with a 6-inch diameter and weighed around 300 pounds, which would use an explosive within a beryllium oxide chamber filter, then covered by a uranium radiation mirror. Both had an open end against a flat plate of tungsten propellant. The unit could be handled by a machine similar to a vending machine, which was designed with consultation from Coca-Cola. 1 microsecond after ignition, the plasma and neutrons heated the channel filler contained by the uranium shell. 1 or 2 microseconds after that, the filler sent energy to the propellant, vaporizing it. The flat plate created an explosion targeted at the pusher plate. Several flight tests were conducted using regular explosives, rather than the intended nuclear bombs, at Point Loma in San Diego throughout 1959. A 1-meter-high model nicknamed Hot Rod was launched using RDX explosives for 23 seconds, up to 184 feet on November 14, 1959. Another unrelated test was unintentionally informative for Project Orion when the U.S. was testing nuclear weapons during Operation Plum Bomb. During the Pascal B shot on August 27, 1957, a 900-kilogram steel cap plate was accidentally blasted off a test shaft. Photographic evidence suggests it may have reached 6 times the velocity necessary for it to escape the Earth's gravitational influence. Upon exploding, the steel cap plate shot up, but was never found. It's believed it never left the atmosphere, as compression heat would have vaporized it. Further testing revealed several problems with the spaceships proposed by Project Orion. Some were solved during design, while others were beyond the technical limitations of the time. First, there were challenges with the shock absorber, since any failure in the chain of explosions would mean that the pusher plate would be ripped off the ship without sufficient counterforce against its rebound. A gap of only 10 milliseconds was allowed between explosions. This short window proved especially challenging, as launching each bomb out at the ship was a multi-step process that required a gas gun to shoot the devices out of a hole in the center of the pusher plate. Secondly, a particularly troublesome issue was the ablation of the pusher plate. It was unknown whether the plate's erosion could be accurately modeled in the turbulence of rapid and successive nuclear explosions. Fragmentation was also a major concern. This could not be tested without using hundreds or thousands of real nuclear devices. Finally, there was the fact that conventional explosives risked releasing shrapnel that could then damage the pusher plate. Nuclear explosions would have vaporized any debris risks. Realistic tests of the vehicle systems were challenging, bordering on impossible, because there's essentially no proper place to perform over 1,000 nuclear tests without deeply affecting the planet. This risk of nuclear fallout ended up being the biggest hurdle Project Orion had to face. Dyson himself estimated in the 1960s that using conventional nuclear weapons would mean an additional 1 fatal cancer death in the world. While this number has been disputed for its lack of supporting math, it's generally believed that launching a spaceship using such a high number of nuclear bombs would inevitably cause irreparable damage. "1963 marked the death of Project Orion by means of the Partial Test Ban Treaty, signed onto and ratified by 126 nations, including the US, USSR, and UK. The dream of using nuclear pulse propulsion was revived for several proposed projects, including Project Longshot, Project Daedalus by the British Interplanetary Society, and Mini-Magnetic Orion. The idea eventually evolved into a nuclear reactor-powered thermal rocket engine in NASA's NERVA program. The resulting NERVA XE engine was eventually certified for use in the manned mission to Mars, but it was never utilized.